At 5:33. Good evening and welcome to the December 3rd, 2025 Eugene Budget Committee meeting. This is an in-person meeting, and anyone wishing to access the meeting remotely can do so by watching the live stream on the City of Eugene Budget Committee website or by tuning in to the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21. As a reminder, meeting rules apply to all attendees, both in chambers and in the lobby, and include no flags, signs, loud or disruptive language, noise, or conduct that obstructs the business of the Budget Committee. Please keep the room quiet and respectful for all speakers, and you are welcome to wave your hands in silent support. Additionally, we encourage all who are ill or who have had close contact with others who are ill to join our meeting remotely rather than in person. We have masks available in the lobby if you need one. In the case of a medical emergency, an automated external defibrillator, AED, is located on the counter behind the staff at the west side of the room. Emergency exits are through the double doors located at the back of the room and the double doors near the front of the room. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome Tom Boyette. Today marks Tom's first Budget Committee meeting as our newest citizen member. He brings decades of leadership experience in the public sector and will be a valuable asset to the committee. Tom, we are glad to have you on our committee and look forward to collaborating with you on our next few budget cycles. All right. Our first order of business this evening is to approve the minutes from our last meeting on May 28th. The minutes were included in the meeting packet sent on Monday, December 1st. Are there any recommended changes before we approve the minutes? Okay. Is there a motion to approve? Second, thank you. Please raise your hand and hold the hands up until staff get an accurate count. All in favor say aye. Okay, perfect. All opposed? And all abstain. Perfect, thank you. Now I will turn the meeting over to City Manager Maderi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. It's nice to be back here. Can't believe it's December. This will be my last Budget Committee meeting, which will surprise you when I say that I will actually miss you and miss engaging in this, and I'm just going to take us a tiny bit down memory lane. This entire meeting with the Budget Committee around the supplemental budget emerged my first year in this job when committee members expressed an interest in learning more about the supplemental budget, being involved in the supplemental budget, and just felt like it was something we were leaving folks out of. So this has been a tradition that has continued and something that I think has helped build relationships and knowledge along the way. I was thinking about when I started in this role, not only was that feedback, but the next feedback I received was it felt like we were making financial decisions ahead of strategy decisions. And I was like, you're right, and we should be in a different rhythm. And I've shown that diagram many times, but the rhythm really should be that we're talking to the community, understanding what their concerns are, building a strategic plan around that, and then building our budget. And those things should flow together. And we have gotten into that rhythm, and in addition have shifted to a biennial budget, trying to give us a little bit of a longer-term focus and some more flexibility. That has all been really hard work, and it has been a privilege to do that with you and the folks that came before you, and is something I'm really going to miss. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And when somebody asked me recently, what is it that I love most about this job, or what would be the thing that I would miss, I said, I really love solving what seem to be impossible problems with teams of people. And you have, like, especially in the last year as we worked through the financial issues that we've had, coming up with a new trajectory, have certainly filled some of that passion of mine. And tonight, we'll turn it over to Twyla and Maurizio to walk through kind of how we're resolving some of the short-term issues and preparing us for a better future. So with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to Maurizio, and thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maurizio Badalico. I'm a senior financial analyst in the finance division, and tonight I'll be walking us through our updated general fund forecast. So the forecast is a tool that projects how much the city will spend and receive over the next 6 years, assisting policymakers in developing strategies to meet future challenges. Finance staff regularly monitor and track many variables for the forecast, which are shown at a high level here. The city has been utilizing the forecast for many years to help guide us through difficult financial times, including the Great Recession. While the data used in the forecast is updated regularly, the data sources and methodologies have remained relatively consistent over time. Since the 2025 to 2027 budget was adopted several months ago, the general fund forecast has been updated with the most current information available. Tonight, we'll walk through those changes to better understand the city's current financial condition. Given that this is a bi-year in our biennial budgeting process, this update is informational. So before we review the recent changes to the forecast, let's take a quick look at our projected reserve trajectory as of the 25 to 27 adopted budget. The good news is that meaningful progress was made to increase general fund reserves nearly to the target level after years of running well below target coming out of the pandemic. However, a structural imbalance still exists, and over the course of this presentation, you will see how recent changes in forecast assumptions will impact projected reserve levels. So this slide shows general fund revenues that have changed in the forecast since the adopted budget. Starting on the left side, while there were some small revenue increases in the current forecast, none of it was material in nature. So let's move on to the right side and discuss a few revenues that experienced notable decreases since the previous forecast. Starting with property taxes, we have reduced the property tax revenue projection, and we'll talk more about that over the next few slides. eWeb's latest forecast for contributions in lieu of taxes, or SILT, is lower than previously projected, primarily due to lower electric price increases. However, it is important to note that SILT revenue is also influenced by the weather, and we receive the most SILT revenue during the cold winter months. If winter weather turns out to be warmer than anticipated, which has been becoming more common, that has the potential to further reduce SILT revenue. Local marijuana tax revenue has been trending downward, primarily due to market saturation and low retail prices. Thus, we have lowered the revenue projection. Franchise fee revenue from cable TV has been on a long-term decline as people move towards streaming services. This revenue has remained relatively steady for a few years, but it appears there's been a recent acceleration of subscribers finally cutting the cord. And last, interest on investments. This revenue is based on the investment portfolio earnings rate and the average cash balance in the fund. In the updated forecast, this revenue is projected to decrease due to lower reserve balances on which to earn interest. So over the next few slides, we'll take a closer look at property taxes. This chart shows the city's actual growth in taxable assessed value over the last 20 years. This metric is important because the general fund's permanent tax rate has been fixed at the same level since 1997. Therefore, growth in general fund property tax revenue comes from growth in taxable assessed value, which is limited to 3% per year plus new taxable construction. This chart is divided into three sections, starting with before the Great Recession on the left, during the recession in the middle, and post-recession on the right. The most recent actual growth rate came in at 3.8% in the current fiscal year of 26, which is less than the growth rate of 4% that we had projected. Although the annual growth has remained steady recently at 3.8%, it is important to note that the last 2 years included significant events that materially impacted the growth rate. This included the frozen base increase last year, and this year the MUPTI expiration for the Hayward, formerly known as 13th and Olive, and formerly known as Capstone before that. Without these events, the annual growth rates would have been just 3.4% and 3.5% the last 2 years, as indicated by that small dotted green line on the far right side of this chart. Another data set that provides some insight into growth and taxable assessed value is building permit data. This chart shows the value of building permits on taxable property in the city. The bars show taxable building permit activity for each fiscal year, which are lined up with the permit year shown at the bottom of the chart. For this purpose, building permit data is scrubbed to remove permit values that are exempt from property taxes or that fall within an urban renewal district. The end result is that we're looking at building permit values that would be taxable for the city. The blue line shows the annual percent change in taxable property value that we saw on the last slide. This line aligns with the budget year shown at the bottom of the chart. We've lined up the budget year with the permit data from 2 years prior, as we estimate that it takes roughly 2 years to make it onto the tax roll after a building permit is issued. For example, fiscal year 25 permit data helps us project what to expect in the 27 budget year. As you can see in the far right side of this chart, taxable building permit values experienced a notable drop in FY25. This suggests that we may see lower assessed value growth in the out years of the forecast. Here's a look at our current top 10 taxpayers. The right-hand column shows the percent change in assessed value from last year. There are 2 new taxpayers on the top 10 list this year, and those are shown in red. In 4th place is Olive Owner LLC, which is the Hayward Apartments that we just talked about. That MUPD expired and is now fully taxable in fiscal year 26. The other new taxpayer is the Standard Apartments in 9th place. This property is actually located in the Riverfront District, so its new assessed value benefits the Urban Renewal Agency rather than the city. The most notable drop on this list is Valley River Center, which continues its multi-year decline in assessed value. It's also worth noting that Comcast and the other utilities and telecommunication companies on this list are centrally assessed by the state of Oregon and do not follow typical growth patterns. Central assessment can and does result in volatile changes in assessed value from year to year. So one contributing factor towards lower assessed value growth over the last decade is the change property ratio. Introduced by Measure 50, the change property ratio is a county-wide average of assessed value to real market value for properties within the same classification. The change property ratio is important because it's used to determine the assessed value of new construction for the first year on the tax roll. After that, assessed value growth is limited to just 3% per year. Another key point is that lower change property ratios means that it takes more new construction value to generate the same amount of tax revenue. This chart shows the change property ratio trends in Lane County for the most common property types, including residential, commercial industrial, and multifamily housing. The ratios have been generally trending down because real market values have been growing faster than assessed values. However, on the far right side of this chart, you'll see a leveling off or a slight uptick of the ratios because real market value growth has slowed considerably as the real estate market cools down after several years of significant price acceleration. Another key driver of property tax revenue is the collection rate. The city does not receive 100% of taxes levied for 2 primary reasons. First, the majority of taxpayers take advantage of an early payment discount of up to 3%. Second, not everyone pays their taxes in time, and thus taxes owed become past due. We had previously forecasted a collection rate of 95.6%, but as you can see on the far right side of the chart, the actual collection rate has fallen short of that amount over the last 2 years. So to summarize all the property tax data that we've seen and the recent trends that we've reviewed, we've actually lowered the property tax revenue forecast based on a couple of assumptions. First, we lowered the assumed taxable assessed value growth rate from 3.6% down to 3.5% per year. We also lowered the assumed collection rate from 95.6% down to 95.5%. While these may sound like small changes, the resulting impact on projected property tax revenue is significant. These assumption changes result in a total property tax revenue reduction of $4.3 million over the full 6-year forecast period compared to where we were with the adopted budget. So now let's shift gears from revenues and talk about expenses, and we'll start with increased expenditures in the current forecast as shown on the left. Inflation has increased since the adopted budget forecast, adding upward pressure on wages and the cost of materials and services. The forecast is sensitive to inflation, and even small increases can lead to significantly higher costs over time. We'll take a closer look at inflation on the next slide. For now, let's move to the right side of this chart and discuss a couple of expenditures that have actually decreased since the previous forecast, starting with the pension bonds rate. The city's pension obligation bonds were issued in 2002 to pay down the estimated unfunded PERS liability at that time. Since then, the city has assessed a percentage of employee wages in order to pay the debt service on these bonds. The rate is reviewed annually and is adjusted as needed to ensure adequacy of fund resources without collecting more than is needed. Currently, it's anticipated this rate will be reduced for the final 2 years before the debt is fully retired in FY28. And the December supplemental budget includes funding to participate in another round of the PERS Employer Incentive Fund, or EIF for short. The PERS rate offset over the next 6 years will save the general fund more than the upfront payment, so it's a net cost reduction over the forecast period. And we'll talk a little bit more about EIF later. Let's look at inflation. So Oregon's chief economist issues inflation forecasts 4 times per year. This chart shows the most recent forecast for December as the blue line on the right side. This is compared to the March forecast that was included in the adopted budget. While the pace of inflation has slowed considerably since hitting a peak of 7.2% in fiscal year 22, lingering price pressures remain and are proving persistent as the economy continues to face uncertainty about future inflation impacts in relation to events happening at the federal level. As I mentioned on the last slide, even small changes in inflation can have a big impact on the general fund forecast. For example, in fiscal year 28, as highlighted by that red oval on the chart, the projected CPI increased from 1.8 to 2.6% between the March forecast and the December forecast. This one difference alone increases projected general fund expenditures by over $1 million per year on an ongoing basis. Going a little further, if the out-year inflation rates end up being higher than the current forecast by about 1% each year, general fund costs would increase by $17 million over the forecast period. So as I mentioned earlier, the December supplemental budget includes funding to participate in another round of the PERS Employer Incentive Fund. The city previously participated in this program back in July of 2020 with a $5 million contribution. This time, the city will make a lump sum contribution of $8 million and receive a $2 million match from the state for a total side account of $10 million. Achieving a side account of $10 million comes with the added benefit of allowing the city to choose a shorter amortization period rather than the default of 20 years. The city plans to elect the shortest amortization period available, which will maximize the rate offset over the next 6 years, starting on January 1st. The estimated citywide savings over the full amortization period is $12.4 million. About half of the city's PERS costs are incurred in the general fund, and this investment and the resulting rate reduction reduces PERS costs in the general fund by about $1 million per year over the forecast period. So now let's focus on the general fund savings account, also known as the Reserve for Revenue Shortfall. This reserve is our financial cushion, which is a key part of our financial management. Having an adequate reserve allows us to weather unexpected events and take time to develop thoughtful, strategic responses rather than having to take immediate action to cut services. Maintaining reserves in good economic times is the key to weathering recessionary periods with minimal service interruptions. Additionally, having a sufficient reserve is a factor in our high credit rating, which translates into lower borrowing costs for the city, saving taxpayer resources in the long term. So this first line represents our savings account target. The previous reserve target was 8% of annual expenditures, but now that the city has transitioned to a biennial budget, the equivalent reserve target is 4% of biennial expenses. The 4% reserve target level is approximately $17 million per biennium on average over the forecast period. $17 million per biennium. The blue line shows the forecasted reserve as of the 2025 to 2027 adopted budget, which we saw earlier tonight. This red line shows the updated reserve trajectory in the current base case forecast. This line reflects all of the changes we reviewed tonight, and it's trending downward due to reduced revenues and increased expenditures compared to the adopted budget forecast. The base case forecast also includes all supplemental budget actions as proposed, which Twyla will review with you later. So while we have a balanced budget this biennium, under today's point-in-time assumptions, a future ongoing reduction strategy of $2.2 million per year starting in the next biennium would be needed to achieve the target reserve level as reflected by the green line. A lot will change over the coming year that will impact the forecast, and this number will change, including efforts around strategic budgeting and long-range financial planning. Staff will continue to regularly monitor the forecast and provide updates along the way. And before we leave this slide, I do want to mention a couple of items to keep in mind as we look beyond our current 6-year forecast horizon. First, the recent stormwater fee increase to fund park services will expire after 6 years. Absent other actions, about $5 million per year of parks expenses would return to the general fund just beyond our current forecast period. Second, the Oregon legislature passed a bill in 2024 that establishes a new PERS hazardous position classification. This new classification includes 911 telecommunicators and includes higher benefits and earlier retirement eligibility. This legislation will lead to higher contribution rates just beyond the current forecast period, and currently there is no estimate available for the amount of this cost increase. So I'll wrap up today by reviewing some risks and areas of uncertainty as we look to the future. I'll work my way from left to right across this slide. So let's start with distressed funds. Staff continue to closely monitor distressed funds to evaluate if additional financial support is necessary for fund stability. For example, the current general fund budget includes a $1.1 million transfer to support the ambulance transport fund. So we talked about inflation, and recent economic events are likely to have continued upward pressure on inflation. If inflation increases and persists for a longer time than currently anticipated by the state's chief economist, this could have a significant impact on the forecast. Next up, federal and state funding. Staff continue to monitor events at the federal level to understand how the city might be impacted. We're also preparing for the upcoming 2026 state legislative session that will begin early next year. And as I mentioned on the last slide, the recent stormwater fee increase to fund park services will expire in 6 years, absent any other action. PERS and personnel costs. So contracts for our union groups are negotiated on a 3-year rolling cycle, and the impact of future bargaining is unknown and uncertain how it will impact our future costs. Regarding PERS, higher costs are anticipated in the future due to that new hazardous position classification that I mentioned. Also, I do want to mention the next PERS board meeting is coming up this Friday, and the PERS actuary will be reviewing their latest financial modeling. We also expect to soon receive Eugene-specific advisory PERS rates for the next biennium, which could also materially impact the forecast if they vary from our current assumptions. Evolving service needs. We currently live in a dynamic world, and service needs continue to evolve. Underfunded services remain across the organization. And lastly, the economy. In the most recent economic forecast, Oregon's chief economist did say the national economy shows hints of pickup with the caveat that there was a data blackout resulting from the federal government shutdown. However, ongoing uncertainty and the possibility of an economic recession remains. The Oregon Office of Economic Analysis currently estimates a 25% chance of an upcoming recession. And with that, I will turn it over to Twyla to provide an overview of the supplemental budget.
Great, thanks, Maurizio. Good evening, everyone. I'm your Chief Financial Officer, Twyla Miller, and I will be highlighting some of the supplemental budget items that will be going to council on Monday. First, I wanted to start off with this view of our financial cycle. So there's a lot going on in the slide, but just a high-level reminder of kind of the elements that influence our supplemental budget. So we are in a 2-year cycle and a biennial budget. So we have 2 fiscal years each biennium, and our fiscal year cycles run July to June. We do process 2 supplemental budgets each year, typically one in December, which is the one we're talking about now, and another in June of each year. The supplemental budget really is to allow for changes to the adopted budget that weren't known at the time the budget was created. When you think about the assumptions and what we know a year to 18 months prior to as we begin to develop a budget and when a budget is adopted. These changes often include grant funding, budget authority to align with current council direction that's happened in the last few months, audit adjustments, or other events. And while we budget for a 2-year cycle, we are in an annual audit cycle. So we do have our financial audit conducted by our external auditors, Baker Tilly, each year. So that's that blue box there that you see. So this summer and fall, we were conducting the audit for the fiscal year and the biennium that ended in June. So the council will receive the actual ACFR, our annual comprehensive financial report, this January, but those audited numbers are part of the supplemental budget that we'll be talking about this evening. Because the first budget in a biennium actually recognizes all of those adjustments from the last biennium from the audit, it is our largest and most complex supplemental budget that we process each cycle. So we'll start out by talking about the general fund. I'm going to talk about things at a high level here. This is a kind of a just-in-time process, so there will be a very comprehensive agenda item summary that's going to council that we will also send to all the budget committee members. There's a lot of narrative and a lot of great information. As you look through the items and review that, if you have questions, you can reach out to budget staff or your budget buddy. If you have questions along the way, again, this supplemental budget will be going to council this coming Monday. There'll be a public hearing, and then council will take action. So we'll start out by looking at the general fund. So when the proposed budget is prepared each spring, we prepare an estimate of the revenues we'll receive in the general fund and what we believe we'll spend in the biennium. At the end of the biennium, when it ends on June 30th, we actually do a reconciliation between what we estimated and what actually happened, and that's the marginal beginning working capital adjustment that you see here. As we come into this biennium, $5.5 million in resources are flowing forward into the general fund. The factors that are influencing that are revenues. As Mauricio said, revenues generally were down. So property tax revenues and SILT were the large drivers there on revenues, kind of offset a little bit by higher investment earnings in the biennium. And at the same time, our actual departmental expenditures were less than projected by $6.5 million. And this is primarily due to department underspending on projects and programs that were began but not completed in the last biennium. And in many cases, that funding needs to come forward. We also have a reserve for encumbrance process that occurred last spring as well. Oftentimes, there are contracts that have been begun in the last biennium but aren't completed at the end of the budget cycle, and those we need authority to complete that work in the next budget cycle. So last spring, we asked staff to estimate the amount of budget authority they might need to be carried forward, and that's shown here as the $6 million in the adopted reserve for encumbrance. When we completed the audit as of June 30th, the amount that needed to be carried forward to complete that contracted work was actually $2.4 million, which leaves $3.6 million in resources to be allocated on this supplemental budget. And then finally, each cycle on supplemental budgets, we allocate grant resources, and there'll be $1.7 million in grants recognized on the supplemental budget in the general fund. So this leaves a total of $10.8 million in general fund resources that's rolling forward or being recognized on this supplemental. So next, we'll look at the recommended allocation of those resources here. So reappropriations are one-time dollars that were received in a prior budget cycle for programs or projects that were authorized but not complete again by the end of the biennium. Those funds are reappropriated into the current biennium for the same purpose, so those programs and projects can be completed. There are a wide range of those items, and there'll be a table that will, and narrative that will be detailing all of those pieces in your agenda item summary. Some of the larger items include $1.4 million for unhoused response. This includes $450,000 for shelter-related costs, $137,000 for service provisions such as housing navigation, case management, and camping response, $100,000 for parking enforcement to address derelict vehicles in the right-of-way, almost $500,000 to support shelter programs, and $213,000 to maintain transitional housing support with local partners. This also includes an additional reappropriation of $1 million for affordable housing. Here, they're rolling forward is almost $700,000 for the development of affordable housing through city fee assistance. Fees are paid once all other financing is in place and construction is ready to begin. We're also rolling forward $300,000 for SDC, or System Development Charge Gap Funding for affordable housing, to assist qualifying local affordable housing projects pay for SDC fees. I do have another slide where we'll go into detail on all the one-time funding requests, but the other major items here are, again, the revenue-backed items and grants. So this is a variety of mostly smaller grants, some which are reappropriated from the prior cycle, and there'll be a table in the council packet as well. And then after all of these other appropriations, it leaves 1.5 or almost $1.6 million that we're proposing be put in reserve for revenue shortfall. This investment will bring our reserve to $17 million, and it's a prudent action to shore up our reserves given all the uncertainties that Mauricio was just talking about. After this investment, the reserve will be about 3.6% of general fund expenditures, which is close to our 4% target, but not quite meeting it in the biennium. So now we'll take a closer look at the one-time funding requests. The largest really is the PERS EIF contribution that Mauricio was talking about earlier. You know, oftentimes there isn't anything we can do to impact our PERS rates or the PERS system, but this is one action the city can take to make a positive impact. And we also received matching funds from the state, and as Mauricio said, it actually lowers our PERS rates over the 6-year amortization period. So this program allows PERS employers to make the lump sum payment to pay down our unfunded actuarial liability, again with that 25% match. So overall, across the city, we'll invest $8 million. We'll receive a $2 million match for a $10 million total site account. And over that 6-year time period, we'll save $12.4 million. So it seems like a good investment and a way we can impact our costs. The second item there is parks and open space revenue support. So when we transitioned parks expenditures from the general fund into the stormwater fund, we didn't actually start collecting increased revenues till August. So this provides 1 month of funding for those expenditures for July to cover costs and make that that fund whole. The next item is our contract tracking system implementation. So the city has a very old and kind of antiquated contract tracking system. This is a good investment which will help modernize our systems and provide increased efficiencies across the organization. And then the next is a personnel expense adjustment as a result of a labor contract negotiation. And then the two pieces below, we have sustainability program implementation. This adds $291,000 to support city council-directed sustainability initiatives, including this climate recovery ordinance. And then $35,000 for the pilot vehicle ownership navigation program. So this is a one-year pilot program in community court, and this was as a result of direction at a June 9th City Council work session. This will establish a one-year pilot program for vehicle ownership navigation services. Funds will be used to assist individuals in navigating the DMV and insurance processes to secure proof of vehicle ownership and obtain insurance coverage, including in cases where their vehicle has been impounded. And then the last two items shown, one is $200,000 for strategic planning staff. This fully funds for the biennium, a limited duration position that has been working to support the strategic plan, community survey, and long-range strategic budgeting and long-range financial planning efforts. This will help continue that work through the biennium as we evaluate the program and make investments in that area. And then finally, we have the senior program coordinator. This makes 0.85 FTE a fully funded position to help us comply with ADA efforts across the organization. So those are the one-time funding requests in the general fund of $3.8 million. Next, we'll transition to the non-general funds. I'm going to cover this at a much higher level, but I'll give some of the highlights. Again, there's a lot of information in the packet that will be coming. So reappropriations, again, those were for projects and programs that were started last cycle that are rolling forward into this. The two largest there really are $1.9 million for fleet vehicle and equipment purchases and $1.2 million for regional wastewater projects. There's a range of one-time funding requests. These come from the non-general funds from their balance available as far as the funding source. And they include $2.6 million for new airport projects, $1 million for the Cuthbert access improvements, $1 million for a water and sewer infrastructure project. There are several community safety payroll tax or CSPT investments that I'd like to highlight as well. The first is just over $900,000 for the Downtown Response Clean Team. This will support the Downtown Response Clean Team through the end of the biennium and expand the service from the current service delivery of 5 days a week to 7 days a week coverage. We're also providing $381,000 for community safety payroll tax for the expansion for the Fund for All Youth program and youth programming funding, and expanding the Resolve and Vibe programs to support youth services. Another CSPT investment is $325,000 for dawn-to-dawn shelter support. The state of Oregon significantly reduced funds for shelter and unhoused support to Lane County and by extension to the city in the current biennium. The state is anticipated to marginally increase funding available in FY27. However, there is a need for gap funding this year in FY26 to continue vital shelter services. Funding includes $200,000 to support the 131-bed capacity dawn-to-dawn site on Highway 99 and $125,000 to support key services at city-supported shelters that are planned to be restored in FY27. There's also $200,000 for hazardous property abatement funding from the CSPT. This is to support the removal, abatement, and mitigation of hazardous materials and debris related to trespassing and compliance actions across Eugene. And then finally, $100,000 from the CSPT to purchase thermal imaging cameras for fire. Those were the major, there are other actions happening that, of course, that are smaller that you can see in the packet when it's available. And then the budget transfers, the large one here really is to support reorganization. So we have moved our emergency management program from the Central Services Department to the Public Works Department. This, a large part of this transfer is the funding and the FTE to realign funding and statistic with the current organizational structure. And then, as you can see, there's about almost $139 million in grant funding that is recognized or being reappropriated on the supplemental budget. $68 million of that is for airport projects, and $43 million is for transportation capital projects. I'd like to briefly talk about some position changes. We don't often see position changes in a supplemental budget, But as we've moved to a biennial budget, we are from time to time recognizing the need to add some positions. These positions are showing up here, and you should expect to see them in the 2027, 2029 budget as well, as the intent is to make these ongoing. So the first item there, additional shift coverage, is really adding only the statistic and not the funding. Starting this January, we're adding an additional fire shift, which will reduce individual employee hours worked each week per the most recent collective bargaining agreement. The new shift schedule is designed to reduce the work week for fire personnel and increase the relief time needed to rest and recover between shifts. The additional FTE statistics are supported by existing overtime operating funds already included in the 2025-2027 adopted budget. There's also a civil litigator position being added in the Risk and Benefit Fund for an assistant city attorney to help with the civil litigation workload, and this is funded again out of the Risk Fund. We're also adding a development and infrastructure technician out of the Road Fund. This position is required to help us for work in the public right-of-way pursuant to the American with Disabilities Act. And then finally, this is the FTE, adding the statistic for the senior program coordinator position that I referenced earlier, making this a full-time position to help with other ADA compliance work across the organization. And in the urban renewal, there's a few audit adjustments. It's a very small urban renewal supplemental budgets. The one-time request really is related to the two projects you see here on this slide. And this really is budgeting additional funds for two projects to align with previous agency board direction that occurred earlier, but after the proposed budget had been submitted to the Budget Committee and Council. We're almost done. I'm just going to come back to this slide again just to think about our financial cycle. There are a lot of actions here, a lot of audit actions and other actions that are happening to support some one-time investments. However, we recognize there are many conversations happening at council and the community that may require future funding, such as the fire governance conversation that will be happening next week. Maybe we have a technical advisory group that a report will be going to council next week as well. There may be recommendations ultimately that come out of that report that may require funding. And there are other issues such as the future of alternative response as we work through the RFP process and other conversations happening in the community. So this is just a reminder that this isn't just the first supplemental budget of the biennium. We will have another budget, a supplemental budget in June, and then two more next fiscal year as well. And then I did want to end a little bit on some of the work. So Sarah mentioned earlier just this rhythm we're getting into with strategic planning and strategic budgeting. So these are some of the things that are currently happening now in the organization that will support the work that comes to council and the budget process that will come back to this committee in the future. So if you look to the left under strategic budgeting, we've been asked the question, what is the city required to provide? The council has asked that question. The TAG group, the Technical Advisory Group on Fiscal Stability, has also asked that question. And so we're working through our program structure, refining our structure, and thinking about what programs and services are mandated, what are expected by our community, and kind of what's that core level of expectation by our community, what are support services needed for that, for those programs, as well as enhanced services. The outcome from the work we're doing now into the early winter will come back to council as part of their long-range financial planning efforts later in the spring. And really, it's to be able to present our 25-27 budget through that program lens to be able to help answer that question and give that view of the organization. So that work will come back along with financial policies, which will include service prioritization discussion as part of financial policies. We'll incorporate TAG, or again, the Technical Advisory Group on Fiscal Stability, Those recommendations will be incorporated into that conversation. The organization is also currently, has gone through an unmet needs assessment, so just understanding that in addition to the budget items that are in our budget, we know we have needs now and into the future that aren't reflected in our current service system, so we'll be bringing those needs back as part of that conversation. And again, as Maurizio said, our forecast is a point in time, and we're always looking and monitoring, and so we'll bring you back a financial condition update as well. The hope of the outcome of those conversations with council will help us inform how we approach our budget process. And just as a reminder, in a biennium, it seems like 2 years seems like a long time, but we'll start our budget process development next summer with our rates and our departments so that we can bring a proposed budget to the budget committee the following spring. With that, I'll stop talking and we can, I'll turn it back over to the chair for any questions and conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Twyla and Mauricio. So we will now use the Red Robin format and open the floor to, for the committee to discuss the material presented this evening. We will go around the table in the order which you are seated. You're going to have 3 minutes to share your thoughts or to ask questions. The timer will flash red when you have 15 seconds remaining to speak. Members, as a reminder, please press the button at the base of your microphone to unmute yourself when it is your turn to speak, and remute as we move to the next speaker. Be sure to speak directly into the microphone so the public can clearly hear your questions and comments. We're going to start to my right here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation and all the work that goes into this. And Sarah, thank you for all the work that you've done over the years. It's been a pleasure to serve on this budget committee with you. And I don't really have a ton of questions at the moment, so I'll let it go to the next person.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
Sure, thanks. Slide 7, Valley River Center, minus 21.7%. That's a big drop. Is that because the vacancy rate has gone up?
I don't know the specific details. What I do know is they filed an appeal. It was a couple of years ago. I thought that process was done. I thought it dropped a lot last year. I thought that was the end of it. I was honestly surprised to see it drop again, and I haven't kind of dug into it or reached out to the tax assessor on that. So it could be just a result of an ongoing continued appeal process.
That's like $10, $12 million. Okay. Previously, you guys have talked about the amount of general fund, the amount of growth we need, commercial and residential, to get us $1 million of extra revenue. Do you remember that off the top of your head?
It
Like
varies.
number of Valley River centers and how many houses?
Yeah, it varies based on what type of property class it is. But generally, you're looking in the neighborhood of construction value, we'll say $250, $300 million of market value to then get multiplied by the change property ratio to then get turned into $1 million of general fund revenue.
Either commercial or residential.
Yeah, it can vary. It varies somewhat. The range is like 250 to 350, kind of depending on
Per
which-
year to get
of
one
construction
additional.
value. Yes.
Yeah, construction, to get one additional $1 million for the general fund. So if you have a $10 million deficit, that's $2.5 billion.
It's in the neighborhood of $2 billion.
Yeah, right. Okay, that's why we say we can't necessarily grow your way out of this problem. On slide 13, revenue for shortfall, the what if $2.2 million year reduction strategy, is that all within the general fund or is that overall from the city?
Good question. That's all within the general fund.
Unfortunately, that's what I thought. On slide 19, I'm happy to see the urgent community needs being the sustainability program implementation being added as a one-time request. I think that's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Zelenka. Tom Boyette.
First, I just want to thank you for the welcome, Chair. And as Counselor Zelenka keeps pointing out, why in the world did I do this? And I think
So afterwards, you have to put the chairs all away.
that I can do. That I can do. I'm good at that. But I think everybody around the table knows because you're doing it as well. So I have some newbie questions. Don't hold it against me. Slide 17 on the, roughly $11 million rebudget. Is that typical on a year-to-year basis? Or does it fluctuate wildly?
It can fluctuate. Really, so two things, the marginal beginning working capital can fluctuate. Some years it's been high. For instance, when we had ARPA funds, it was very high. There was one year it was actually negative. Our estimates were so good, we were actually slightly negative. I would say, in that range for marginal beginning working capital, 2 to 6 million-ish can be typical. And then the reserve for encumbrance, that really depends. Again, staff estimate a little high so that they have enough authority if it rolls, but it just depends on what actually occurs in the last 3 months of the year. And this particular year, we had a lot happen, and so we didn't need to roll as much forward.
So really the key number is the MBWC adjustment, okay?
$600 million budget.
Yeah. My one other question on slide 20 is, what is the funding source for the one-time funding requests in non-general fund 16.34?
So those generally come from the balance available in each fund. So we have a wide range of non-general funds. And so those are supported by the revenues within that fund. So within the road fund or the community safety payroll tax fund or the telecom fund, whatever the fund is. So it's really self-contained within the fund.
And there are reserves in those funds as well, so.
Yes, if there's not a need for a specific reserve, the funding generally flows into a balance available account. If there's some specific reason to hold some funds in reserves, some funds will have both a reserve held for a specific purpose plus funds in balance available.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. Siobhan Kinsell.
Hi. Thank you so much for all of this. I'm sure I'll have questions later. What first springs to mind is kind of on the last slide that you presented with the long-range financial planning, because that was tickling my brain earlier from the notes. Is this in reference to I feel like the last meeting we had, we talked about there being a council meeting in July where there was going to be long-term, long-range financial? Is that what that is referencing?
So we did have a framework discussion in July where council provided direction to form the citizen group, so the Technical Advisory Group on Fiscal Stability, which we are also calling TAG. That group has been meeting this fall. They're going to give a report back to council on their initial a progress update on their work and some draft recommendations this Monday evening at 5:30 at the council work session. That work will continue into early January with a final report going to council in February of next year. The long-range financial planning, all of that work will feed into the kind of the long-range financial planning elements that are on those slides. So there will be another city council retreat on long-range financial planning that will be yet to be scheduled, but as we have a new city manager coming on, and the work in phase one, kind of that strategic budgeting work finishes, those will be scheduled in the spring.
Thank you. And then I just had one other clarifying question on slide 9. There was a mention of early payment discount of 3%. And what's the current tax rate for properties?
Can you
I'm just
clarify
trying
that
to figure
question?
out if it, like, let's say the tax rate is 4% and you get a 3% discount, does that mean that people are only paying 1% in property taxes?
No. It's 3% of the total amount of your tax bill,
If you
so.
pay it early on your tax.
Okay.
bill,
Yeah,
that's what that
it's a
means.
3% dollar discount based on your total tax bill, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarification. And just one other note, Sarah, I will miss you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Moore.
Thank you. I just have two questions. I'll be very fast. First, on slide 21, so we're expecting to add about 30 FTE. I just didn't understand the explanation of the slide. Is this just a preview, or we're adding before the 25-27 biennium?
So all of these FTE will be added now when the budget is approved, so it's a mid-biennium adjustment.
Got it, okay.
You'll see them again as part of the proposed budget, because it's not a one-time where it's just for the remainder of the biennium. The intent is that they're ongoing.
Cool. Thank you. For
Sure.
whatever reason, I just didn't understand. Okay. And second one, on slide, I guess it's slide 20, I forget who was present. I think it was you, Twyla. You said that you expect the state will be bumping shelter funding back up in FY '27. Can you say any more about that? I'm just curious.
I don't, I think maybe slightly differently. We don't expect them to add to the amount of shelter funding statewide unless they make a different decision. But they are talking about a different system for allocation of funding.
Right. Okay.
Right, and
That's what it is. Okay.
so in our conversations with the governor's office about this and some of the reduction in shelter funding that Lane County and the city contracted shelters have seen, and the cost per bed night that we have, which is one of the best in the state, we are hopeful that we might be able to capture more funding.
Good news. All right, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maurizio, Twyla, Sarah, and team, thank you very much. I'm going to reserve most of my inquiries until this is in front of council on Monday, and we get a chance to chew on the slide for more one-time funding that was referenced when we were going over the general fund allocations on slide 18. You hit the 30,000-foot highlights, Twyla, thank you, but I'd like to absorb those before I dive into questions. I'm also interested in exploring some contingencies and emergencies as emerging needs, as other communities in our state recently have, but I'll wait till Monday to expand on that concept further. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Leach.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Just to kind of bounce off of Councilor Keating's comments, yeah, on Monday, we'll be exploring how to move forward in that direction. I will be presenting a motion to possibly add to our council contingency fund for some of the crisis kind of in our community. One question. So the last budget meeting we had, we asked for a kind of a deeper dive into fully funding the alternative response. And now we have, we designated $500,000 to fund the pilot project. And can you just explain, I know this, but I think a lot of community questions are coming in. Can you explain why we're not looking at that in this supplemental budget process?
I can take a shot at answering that, and then I know Chief Caven's in the back, and you might be able to speak to it as well. So, as you know, we went through and did an analysis of the gap that was remaining in providing that alternative response service to the community. Chief Caven and Chief Skinner's teams really worked on that, engaging the community to understand it. They've come up with a peer navigation model and are working through a process to get ready to send out an RFP. So I think the thought is to go through the RFP process to target a year of service and then understand whether or not there is actually a funding gap and be able to, if needed, come back on the next supplemental budget. But I'll pass it off to the chief so he can add.
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on from what we see right now on the peak hour timeline for that group. We've got enough to get it going and start to get the input and feedback on how it's working so that we can come back in mid-biennium and say, here's where we really think it's going to go, what extra funding it might need. We have an opportunity to really dial it in and refine it as we learn more about who else is operating in that space and really help maybe coordinate that a little bit better as well.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for the memo. It was very much appreciated, and I'm excited for the next steps of the process. So appreciate you and the whole team. And Sarah, congrats on your last budget meeting. If I keep talking, I'll cry. Bye.
Thank you. Counselor Groves.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Twyla and Maurizio, for a really well-done presentation. I think, I'm still not sure how I'm going to explain cultural of belonging senior program coordinator. I'm not sure how to explain that to a constituent if they ask about it.
Let's have Mia Carriaga explain that position to you. It'll be easy to explain.
Thank you.
So over time, the organization has met ADA requirements in a number of ways. And we have also reduced our capacity in that particular office to provide coordination across the organization. And over the last few years, we realized we really need that function back. This gives us it's a really good way to do it because we can add capacity to an already existing FTE at a fairly low expense to add a lot of value to the organization. So as one example, in the last year or so, we have new ADA requirements around digital access. Our entire organization is going to need to engage in updating our websites and a number of other software programs that we use. And we don't have somebody to sort of centrally coordinate that in a way that is most helpful to all of the departments. And so this will help do that, for example. Another example is that if somebody wants to access a council meeting and needs accessibility or tools to do that, they can call this office and they will help set that up.
Why don't we just call it ADA?
We can certainly do that.
Culture, it's confusing.
It's because we've put them underneath. We always put your funding request under your strategic plan goal areas. So I understand what you're saying, but that is the name of that area of your strategic plan that you
Who
adopted.
approved that? I know.
Maybe I'll answer that next week.
Okay.
I need to bring a mirror.
And, yeah, that's, that was my point. The other thing, I wanted to follow up on what Councilor Zelenka raised about Valley River Center and the reduction. I know the land certainly hasn't gone down in value. I would like to understand that better myself. That just seems like an awfully big drop. And then I guess I will end with welcome Tom on board. It's nice to have you here. And thank you, Sarah, for your years of service and help with this process from a number of different positions. What will you ever do with all that time? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Ye.
Well, that time to do nothing.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks staff again for, another very thoughtful and easy to understand presentation about a very difficult topic. And also thanks, Twyla, for making time to meet and to go through things to make sure I understand what's going on. I really appreciate that. I don't have any questions. I think people asked really great questions already. It's nice to go at the end. And I also look forward to Councilor Leach's motion she's bringing on Monday. It sounds like something I would be happy to support. So I'm looking forward to the details. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go next. First, I want to start with thanks to Sarah for your years, and I'm really going to miss the meme way we started our budget committees with the roadmaps and all that, and that was a lot of fun. It was a good way to start what could be a dull process. So thank you for bringing that kind of levity to the work, and the work too of that graph. Kind of, we're finally meeting that mark that when I started was a much wider gap. So thank you, and the city appreciates that work. And to Tom, welcome. We're super excited to have you, and starting slow, but we'll get going in next year. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So I had 3 questions I was just curious about on the PERS participation. Was that the most we could have done, or is there like a cap that is possible there? Just curious about that.
We had to put in an application in reserve funds to reserve match funding. So we went with an $8 million ask to reserve the $2 million in match. So under this cycle, to receive those matching funds, we can deposit up to the $8 million. It seemed prudent, just given our financial situation, that we wouldn't be able to contribute more, and we didn't want to reserve match funds that could go to another jurisdiction by asking for more than we could deposit.
Perfect, that makes total sense.
A one-time thing.
Second, on inflation, I was just curious, is there a lag that we see in other things, inflation, or is that pretty point in time when we have those inflation impacts? I guess, will it impact if there's an inflation rate change, or if we're seeing inflation jump today, does that impact today's budget, or does it impact like a little bit farther down?
Thank you for the clarification. That's a good question. So essentially, when we adopt a budget, we more or less lock in those rates that we assume for budget purposes. So those, unless there's a change to a contractual agreement, for example, we would of course pay whatever the contract says, but generally when we adopt a budget, we assume a number. So we assumed in the current budget, we assumed 2.7 and 2.7% each year, which was based on a 2024 CPI forecast from the state of Oregon. So those are more or less locked into the forecast. So when we get new numbers, I'm updating, not those 2 years, I'm updating the 4 years after that. If that makes sense.
Perfect, thank you. And then the last question I had, I was just curious, I couldn't remember the math. So on slide 13, when we had the what if $2.2 million per year, about how much of our general fund would that be? I don't know if you have the napkin math there about how much we'd have to kind of save on top of the general fund.
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, roughly $200 million a year budget. Our biennial budget's in the $400 million range-ish, so you're talking about 1%.
Awesome, thank you. And that is all I have. Do we have anyone online? Ooh, that's much easier. And then I would like to invite Mayor Knudsen to share thoughts as an honored guest with us.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. And also welcome, Tom. Thank you for your volunteerism on the Budget Committee, and it's really nice to see all of you here this evening. Thank you, Sarah, for your last presentation to the Budget Committee and for all of the excellent work that this team has done to share a lot of really useful information in a very digestible way. We will have a conversation, I think, on Monday at Council that I also am looking forward to, but I have a really quick question. Slide 6. You mentioned that it takes about 2 years to get new development onto the tax rolls after occupancy. Can you just speak to that a bit? I wasn't sure if you meant literally it's just in process and not on the rolls.
Sorry, let me clarify, not after occupancy. That roughly 2 years is after the building permit is issued. So we're talking construction, then occupancy. Once they get their certificate of occupancy, it basically joins the tax roll next July 1 in its full capacity, yeah.
Thank you. Very appreciated clarification. My other question is related, and it has to do with one of the bills from the last legislative session that had to do with support for our Lane County tax assessor in the process of essentially updating properties and their taxable value, that we are behind by decades in some areas, and it leads to an even more inequitable system. Is there any sense of that work's potential to influence these numbers, or is it just such a slow, sort of one drop at a time that it won't be measurable in our forecasting?
It's hard to say, but likely that effort, if that bill did not pass to my knowledge, but if it comes back and it does pass in the future, this would allow the county to give them more capacity to hire some resources to then perhaps do an even better job than they already do finding property that's currently missing from the tax roll. So I would not, although that, I don't anticipate that to be a material impact to our, finding the effect of 1 or 2 properties, unless it would have to be something substantial, which would probably not fly under the radar. So yes, it would absolutely help, but I wouldn't expect it to be material in nature.
Thank you. And I'll just add that the final slide of the presentation around the strategic budgeting framework, really appreciate the integration of all of these different altitudes and layers of work in the long range efforts to stabilize our community and meet a very wide range of needs with limited resources. So appreciations to this whole team for that effort.
Thank you very much for the presentations. Now we are going to move to the election of the Budget Committee Chair and Vice Chair. So at this time, I would like to open the floor for nominations for the position of Chair. Councilor Ye.
I would like to nominate Commissioner Kanofsky for chair.
Thank you. Second. Councilor Zwinkler, did you have your hands up too, or did I?
I was going to do the same thing.
Oh, well, thank you. Any other nominations? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand and hold it up for the count. Okay, thank you. All opposed? And all abstaining? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence. I will now proceed to the vice chair. Do I have any nominations for vice chair? Ryan Moore.
Do I get to give an explainer or just say a name? Okay, Siobhan Kensel.
Seconds.
Do you accept? Yeah. Any other nominations? Okay. All in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay. All opposed? And all abstaining. All right. I see none. Thank you very much. Welcome, Siobhan. Okay. I think now we're moving to wrap up. So Budget Committee members and the public will have an opportunity for public testimony at the December 8th City Council meeting. The meeting will start at 7:30. Detailed supplemental budget materials will be posted online this Friday, December 5th, ahead of the council session. And you will receive an email from the budget office with a link in case you would like to review the materials prior to the City Council meeting. If you have any additional questions, you can email the City Budget Manager, Christina. Okay. And with that, we are adjourned at 6:45.